Most garden centers stock what sells in 6 weeks, not what survives 6 years, and that single fact is why so many beginners quit before their second summer. 9 out of 10 plants on the bestseller rack at a big box garden center are annuals. That means you buy them, plant them, watch them die by October, and do it all again next spring, forever. Nobody warns beginners about that cycle because it is the business model. This is your full gardening for beginners guide, and it's built differently. I'll show you 10 plants that come back on their own year after year so you can have a garden that actually looks like something by June without spending every weekend replanting the same bare patch of soil. Stay until the end. The last plant is a hidden gem most beginners have never even heard of, and it might be the one that changes how you think about your whole garden. And around the halfway mark, I'll share something about plant spacing that most nurseries would rather you didn't work out for yourself because it's costing you money every single spring. I've spent the last several seasons testing beginner-friendly plants in real gardens, not greenhouse showrooms, actual backyards with clay soil, patchy sun, and neighbors' cats. Some of what's on the easy lists at the garden center died within a month. Some of what's ignored on the bottom shelf turned out to be nearly indestructible. This list is the result of that trial and error, so you don't have to burn a summer finding out the hard way. Everything on this list has earned its place. Nothing here requires a gardening degree, a big budget, or a forgiving climate. It just requires you to plant it once and let it do its job. Plant number 1, purple coneflower, Echinacea purpura. Coneflower spent years getting shoved to the back of nursery displays behind flashier annuals because a plant that blooms for free every summer doesn't need repeat customers. That's not a flaw. That's the entire point, and it's exactly why beginners overlook it. A single established coneflower plant can produce over 20 flowering stems in one season. That's more cut flowers than most people buy from a florist in an entire year for the cost of one plant. For a beginner, the real win isn't just the color. It's that coneflower barely needs watering once it's settled in, and it laughs at the kind of dry August that kills off delicate annuals. If you've ever gone on holiday and come home to a dead flower bed, this is the plant that doesn't punish you for having a life. In the US, it thrives in USDA zones 3 to 9. Plant it in mid to late spring after the last frost once the soil has warmed. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H5 to H7, so plant from April through May in any well-draining border. In Canada, it's reliably winter hardy down to zone 3, though it's worth mulching lightly in colder prairie regions for extra protection in the first winter. Here's the part most beginner guides skip. Don't deadhead every spent bloom in autumn. Leave the seed head standing through winter, and they'll bring finches and other seed-eating birds straight into your garden, turning a flower bed into free wildlife entertainment. Choosing a plant that feeds itself, seeds itself, and feeds the birds around it says something about the kind of gardener you're becoming, one who works with the garden instead of constantly wrestling it. Coneflower is the plant that proves easy doesn't mean boring, and the next one on this list proves that low maintenance can also mean genuinely fragrant. Plant number 2, Catmint Walker's Low, Nepeta. Catmint gets confused with catnip and dismissed as a novelty plant for cat owners, which is a shame because that mix-up has kept one of the toughest, longest blooming perennials off most beginner shortlists for decades. This plant can flower for up to 16 weeks straight from late spring into early autumn. That's longer than most school summer holidays, from a plant that needs almost no attention in between. The lazy gardener win here is huge. Give catmint one rough haircut in midsummer, and it will flush out a second wave of blooms within about 2 weeks. Compare that to bedding plants that need deadheading every few days just to keep looking presentable, and it's obvious which one is actually built for a busy homeowner. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 3 to 8. Plant in spring once the ground is workable, and it tolerates poor, dry soil beautifully. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H6, so plant April to May. It's a classic cottage garden staple for good reason. In Canada, it's reliable to zone 3, one of the most cold-tolerant flowering perennials available. No winter protection needed. Insider tip: plant catmint along a path edge, not in the middle of a bed. Every time someone brushes past it, it releases a burst of fragrance that most people assume is coming from an expensive rose somewhere nearby. A gardener who understands that placement matters as much as plant choice is already thinking 2 steps ahead of the neighbors. If catmint is the fragrant workhorse, the next plant on this list is the one that turns a bare, sunny wall into a golden wave of color without a single moment of fuss. Plant number 3, Black-Eyed Susan, Rudbeckia fulgida, Goldsturm. Black-Eyed Susan used to be a staple of every roadside verge and municipal planting scheme in the 1970s, and somewhere along the way it got rebranded as old-fashioned by an industry constantly chasing the next trend color. That rebrand cost beginners one of the toughest, most reliable golden perennials ever bred. A mature clump can spread to cover roughly 60 centimeters, nearly 2 feet of ground within just 3 growing seasons, filling space that would otherwise need constant weeding. For someone just starting, that spread is the entire benefit. Fewer bare patches means fewer weeds finding a foothold, which means less time spent kneeling in the dirt pulling things you didn't plant. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 3 to 9, plant in spring, and it tolerates almost any soil type without complaint. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H7, so plant April through June for flowers by midsummer. In Canada, it's hardy to zone 3, one of the most dependable golden perennials for prairie and coastal gardens alike. The insider tip most beginners never hear. Divide the clump every 3 to 4 years, and you get free plants for other parts of the garden, or for a neighbor, without spending another penny at the garden center. A gardener who can multiply their own plants for free has quietly opted out of the entire spring bedding plant economy. We're only 3 plants in, and the one at number 7 is the one that surprised me most when I tested how little water it actually needed. Plant number 4, Daylily hemerocallis. Daylily got dismissed by design magazines as too common right around the same time garden centers started pushing exotic tropical look annuals that die at the first frost. What got buried in that shift was one of the single toughest, most forgiving flowering plants a beginner can own. Each flower only lasts 1 day, hence the name. But a mature clump produces so many buds that it can stay in continuous bloom for up to 8 weeks, which most people mistake for one very long-lasting flower. The frustration this solves is a classic one. Plants that need just the right soil. Daylilies don't care. Clay, sandy, slightly soggy, bone dry between rains, they adapt and keep flowering regardless. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 3 to 9. Plant in spring or early autumn, one of the most widely adaptable perennials sold in North America. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H6, so plant March to May for the strongest first-year establishment. In Canada, it's hardy to zone 2 in wide varieties, genuinely one of the most cold-tolerant flowering plants available anywhere. Here's the insider fact garden centers rarely mention. Daylily flowers and buds are edible, and some upscale restaurants pay a premium for them as a garnish. Growing something that doubles as decoration and dinner is the kind of quiet self-sufficiency that separates a real gardener from someone who just bought some flowers. Daylily proves that common doesn't mean cheap-looking, and next up is a plant that solves the exact problem every beginner has with their driest, most neglected corner. Plant number 5, Sedum Autumn Joy, Hylotelephium. Sedum got stereotyped for years as a grandma plant, a label that pushed an entire generation of beginners away from one of the most drought-tolerant, structurally interesting perennials that exists. That reputation had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with marketing, chasing younger buyers with flashier, thirstier plants. Sedum stores water in its thick, fleshy leaves, which means it can go 3 to 4 weeks without rain and barely show it, while nearby annuals wilt within days of a dry spell. For a beginner who's forgotten to water before or simply doesn't want a garden that depends on remembering, this is the plant that removes that anxiety completely. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 3 to 9, plant in spring, and it thrives in the drives and the Yost, sunniest, most neglected spot in the yard. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHSH7, so plant April to June in free-draining soil. It avoids wet feet beautifully once established. In Canada, it's hardy to Zone 3, a genuine workhorse across the prairies where dry summers are the norm. The insider tip here: leave the dried flower heads standing through winter. Frost turns them into striking bronze structures that catch morning light, giving your garden visual interest in months when most beds look completely bare. A gardener who finds beauty in a plant other people call dead has stopped needing everything to bloom to feel like the garden is working. Sedum handles the driest ground in your garden without complaint, and the next plant handles something almost every beginner underestimates: shade. Plant number 6, Hosta. Hosta got written off by Sun Garden marketing as a niche plant for the shady, unglamorous side yard. Nobody photographs for social media, which is exactly why it's one of the most underplanted perennials for beginners with a shady garden and no idea what to do with it. A single mature hosta clump can produce leaves large enough to cover a dinner plate, and some varieties spread to over 90 centimeters wide within 4 years, filling shaded ground that almost nothing else will cover. The real frustration Hosta solves is the shady, patchy lawn corner every beginner has and doesn't know what to plant there. Most flowering plants need direct sun. Hosta doesn't just tolerate shade, it depends on it. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 3 to 9. Plant in spring or early autumn in any shaded or partially shaded bed. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHSH7, so plant March to May, an absolute staple of British shade gardens. In Canada, it's hardy to Zone 3, one of the most reliable perennials for the shaded, north-facing side of a home. Insider tip: slugs love hosta, so beginners often give up on it after year 1. Skip the sprays entirely and surround the base with crushed eggshells or coarse grit instead. It works, it's free, and it doesn't involve buying a single chemical product. Solving a problem plant with something already in your kitchen bin is exactly the kind of resourcefulness the garden industry never wants you to realize you already have. Hosta solves shade, and the next plant solves one of the most common beginner mistakes there is: not knowing what actually loves being ignored. Plant number 7, Russian sage, Salvia youngi, formerly Perovskia. Russian sage rarely makes the front tables at garden centers because it doesn't look like much in a small nursery pot. It needs a full season in the ground to show what it can do, and impatient retail displays simply don't have that kind of time to sell you on it. This is the plant I mentioned at the very start. Once established, it can go up to 5 weeks without a single drop of extra water, in full sun, in poor soil, and still produce a haze of lavender blue flower spikes from mid-summer into autumn. That's the frustration it solves. Beginners are often told to water new plants constantly, and Russian sage flips that advice on its head. Overwatering it is actually more likely to kill it than underwatering ever would. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 4 to 9. Plant in spring in the sunniest, driest spot available. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHSH6, so plant April to May. It thrives in gravel gardens and poor soil that other plants reject. In Canada, it's hardy to Zone 4 in most regions. In colder Zone 3 pockets, choose a sheltered south-facing spot for best results. Here's the number I promised earlier. Most nursery recommended spacing charts tell beginners to plant flowering perennials 30 to 45 centimeters apart to fill in faster. Russian sage actually performs best with slightly wider spacing because crowding restricts the airflow it needs to avoid mildew. Tighter spacing just means you buy more plants than you need. Knowing that one detail alone can save a beginner an entire flat of unnecessary plants on a single project. That's the spacing secret I promised you back at the start, and it applies to almost everything on this list. Speaking of things that reward patience, the next plant on here does exactly that, with fragrance thrown in for free. Plant number 8, lavender, Munstead, Lavandula angustifolia. Lavender gets sold constantly as a delicate, fussy plant that needs a Mediterranean climate to survive, which scares off far more beginners than it should. That reputation comes mostly from tender lavender varieties being marketed alongside the genuinely hardy ones, with no distinction made at the till. Munster lavender can survive winter temperatures down to around -20 degrees Celsius once established, roughly the temperature of a home freezer, while still producing fragrant flower spikes every single summer. The lazy gardener win is fragrance and deer resistance in one plant. Most deer, rabbits, and browsing pests leave lavender completely alone, which solves a frustration beginners rarely think to ask about until something eats their new flower bed overnight. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 5 to 9, plant in spring in full sun with sharp drainage. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H5, so plant April to May, a genuine cottage garden essential. In Canada, it's hardy to zone 5 with reliable snow cover. In colder zone 3 to 4 regions, treat it as a container plant to bring in for winter, since ground survival isn't guaranteed there. The insider tip: never cut lavender back into old brown wood. It won't regrow from there, and that single mistake kills more beginner lavender plants than winter cold ever does. A gardener who prunes with restraint, instead of hacking everything back out of habit, is already gardening with more patience than most people ever learn. 2 plants left, and the final one is the plant almost every beginner walks straight past at the garden center without a second look. Plant number 9, Shasta Daisy, Leucanthemum times Superbum. Shasta Daisy is often the first casualty of a modern garden makeover, pulled out because it looks too traditional for design trends that favor ornamental grasses and moody dark foliage instead. What gets lost in that trend cycle is one of the cheapest, most reliable white-flowering perennials a beginner can plant. A single clump can produce over 50 blooms in one season, and each flower can last up to 2 weeks before fading, which adds up to a nearly non-stop white flower display from June through August. The frustration this solves is a financial one. The average North American homeowner spends well over $100 a year on cut flowers for the house. One Shasta Daisy clump, planted once, can supply a full vase of fresh flowers almost every week of summer for free. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 4 to 9. Plant in spring after frost risk has passed. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H6, so plant April to June in any reasonably sunny spot. In Canada, it's hardy to zone 3, dependable even in shorter season northern gardens. Insider tip: Shasta daisies are one of the easiest perennials to divide and are genuinely one of the best starter plants for learning how to propagate for free, since the clump practically falls apart into new plants with almost no effort. Learning to divide your own plants is the moment a beginner stops being a customer of the garden industry and starts being a gardener in the fullest sense. Shasta daisy gives you cut flowers for nothing, and now, finally, the plant I promised you right at the start, and now, the one I promised you at the very start. I saved this for last because it does something almost no other beginner-friendly perennial does, and I genuinely didn't expect it to perform this well when I first tested it. Most beginners scroll straight past this one in the catalog, because it looks unremarkable in a small nursery pot, all thin stems and no flowers yet. That's a mistake. This is plant number 10. Plant number 10, False Indigo, Baptisia australis, hidden gem. False indigo nearly vanished from mainstream nurseries because it takes 2 to 3 years to fully establish before it puts on its best show, and an industry built around fast turnover has little patience for a plant that asks you to wait. Once mature, false indigo develops a taproot that can reach over a meter, more than 3 feet, straight down into the soil, which is why a single plant can survive drought conditions that would kill almost anything else on this list. That deep root is also why it's borderline indestructible for a beginner. There's no fussy watering schedule, no feeding routine, no yearly babying. You plant it, you wait 2 seasons, and then it quietly becomes one of the toughest, longest-lived plants in your entire garden. Some specimens are documented living for over 20 years without division. In the US, it's hardy in USDA zones 3 to 9. Plant in spring and give it its permanent home immediately, since that deep taproot makes it dislike being moved later. In the UK, it's fully hardy, RHS H7, so plant March to May, an increasingly popular choice in modern British perennial borders. In Canada, it's hardy to zone 3, one of the most cold-tolerant flowering perennials available for northern gardens. The insider fact almost nobody knows. False indigo is a legume, which means it actually improves the soil around it by pulling nitrogen from the air and feeding it into the ground. So everything you plant near it later benefits too. Choosing a plant that quietly makes the whole garden better around it without asking for credit is a fitting way to end this list, because that's the whole point of gardening, the smart way. You're not just filling space, you're building something that keeps paying you back. So there you have it. This Gardening for Beginners full guide gave you 10 plants that come back on their own, save you money, and forgive the mistakes every new gardener makes along the way. From coneflower and catmint at the start, through black-eyed Susan, daylily, sedum, hosta, Russian sage, lavender, and Shasta daisy, all the way to false indigo, waiting patiently at the end, every one of these earns its place without demanding yours. Whether you're gardening in the US, the UK, or Canada, this list works. No constant replanting, no complicated care routine, just a garden that gets better every single year, while everyone else is still reading the back of a seed packet. If you're the kind of person who'd rather plant once and enjoy the results for a decade, subscribe. We share guides like this every week, built the same way this one was. Tested first, fluff removed. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these 10 you're trying first. I read every single one.